They chose her birthday, her own birthday. Her mother-in-law walked through the garden with a sealed envelope, dressed like she was delivering justice. Her husband looked away. The crowd went silent. Her triplet daughters held hands. What none of them knew, she had been waiting for this day. The garden was beautiful that evening. String lights were strung from post to post, crossing over each other like stars somebody hung low on purpose. Round tables sat dressed in white linen. Flowers filled every corner. A banner above the entrance read, "Happy Birthday, Lenora," and it swayed gently in the late afternoon breeze like it was proud to be there. Neighbors and family friends had dressed up. Children were running through the grass. Someone had set up a speaker near the back fence, and a slow, warm song was floating through the air. It looked like a celebration. It felt like one too, at least for a little while. Lenora stood near the main table in a soft ivory dress. She was 42 years old, graceful in the way a woman becomes when she has been through things and decided not to let those things take her shape. She had a stillness about her that some people mistook for shyness. She was not shy. She was measured. She had a quiet that came from somewhere deep, the kind of quiet that holds more than it ever lets out. Her 3 daughters, Nia, Celine, and Dara, were running through the garden in matching yellow dresses, chasing each other, laughing loud the way 10-year-olds do when the world still feels like it was made for them. Lenora watched them run, and her face did what it always did when she looked at those girls. It softened. Whatever she was carrying, whatever she had been carrying for months, it lifted for just a moment whenever she looked at her daughters. She poured lemonade into a cup and stood at the edge of the party, watching everything with those quiet eyes of hers. Her husband Kofi arrived late, not a little late, the kind of late that made a statement. He walked through the gate with his phone in his hand, barely looking up. He did not walk to Lenora first. He walked to his mother. Claudette was a tall woman in her late 60s, dressed in deep navy, with the posture of someone who had decided a long time ago that softness was a weakness she could not afford. She and Kofi embraced, and he bent his head close to hers and said something low. She nodded. That was the first thing the guests noticed, not the birthday woman, the late husband and his mother. Then Kofi drifted across the garden toward his friend Deshawn, and the two of them found a corner near the fence and started laughing about something only they knew. Lenora saw it. She always saw everything. She just never made a scene about what she saw. She picked up her lemonade, took a slow sip, and smiled at the neighbor's wife who had just walked over to wish her happy birthday. Then the woman walked in. Her name was Renee. She was in her early 30s, overdressed the way people are when they are trying to communicate something. She did not have an invitation. She walked in through the garden gate like she had every right to be there, and Kofi saw her and waved her over like she was expected. He introduced her to 2 guests nearby as his colleague. Some people smiled politely. Some people looked at each other. Lenora watched from across the garden. Her face did not change. She set her cup down, went to check on her daughters, and helped Dara fix the bow on the back of her dress. The birthday toast was supposed to be warm. It was supposed to be a husband raising a glass to his wife, guests clapping, children stealing cake before dinner. That was what was supposed to happen. What happened instead changed everything. Claudette stood up. She did not wait to be given the floor. She tapped her glass with a spoon, and the talking around the garden fell quiet, one table at a time. People turned to look. Claudette straightened her back and began to speak. She did not call it a toast. She did not call it a tribute. She called it the truth. She said she had watched her son give 20 years to a woman who never deserved him. She said she had stayed quiet long enough out of respect for the marriage, but that there was no more reason for silence. She said Lenora was not the woman Kofi deserved to grow old with, that she had always known something was off, that a real wife would have said so and stepped aside long ago. The garden went completely still. The music had stopped. Someone had turned it off, or it had just felt that way. Guests were looking at their laps, at the sky, anywhere but at Lenora. Kofi stood near the fence with his hands in his pockets and said nothing. He looked at the ground. Deshawn looked at his phone. Renee stood near the dessert table with the smallest smile on her face. Then Claudette reached into her handbag. She pulled out a sealed envelope. She walked it across the garden slowly, with her shoulders back, like she was crossing a stage she had rehearsed for years. She set it on the birthday table next to the cake that had not been cut yet. She looked at Lenora and said, "Consider this a gift." Nia reached for her mother's hand first. Celine stepped in close on the other side. Dara, the youngest by 4 minutes, began to cry without making any sound, the tears just rolling down her face like they did not know how to stop. Lenora looked down at her daughters. She put one hand on Nia's shoulder and one on Dara's cheek and wiped the tears with her thumb. Then she looked at the envelope on the table. Then she looked at Claudette. Then she looked at Kofi. He still did not say anything. Lenora nodded once, slowly, not out of defeat, not out of surrender, the kind of nod that means I already knew this was coming, the kind that means you just made a mistake you do not understand yet. What Claudette did not know, what Kofi did not know, what not one person standing in that garden that evening could have possibly imagined, was that every inch of the ground beneath their feet belonged to Lenora. Every flower, every light, every table, the whole $17 billion story started right there, right in that garden, on that evening. At that birthday party, they turned into something else. To understand Lenora, you have to go back. Way back, before the string lights and the ivory dress and the sealed envelope on the birthday table. You have to go back to a small town in rural Georgia where the roads were red clay and the porches were wooden and wide, and the mornings smelled like pine and something baking. That was where she came from. That was the ground she was made from. Her parents died when she was 7. A car accident on a wet highway late November, the kind of night that takes things without warning. Lenora did not remember it all in sequence. She remembered her grandmother's arms. She remembered being lifted. She remembered the smell of Nana B's house, flower and lavender and cedar wood. And she remembered deciding somewhere in the blur of that grief that she was going to be okay. She did not decide it out loud. She decided it the way a seed decides to push up through concrete. Quietly, without asking permission. Nana B was a small woman who had never been small in any way that mattered. She worked land that had been in the family for 3 generations. She kept a garden that fed them through hard winters. She went to church on Sundays and believed in God, the way people believe in something they have actually seen show up. She did not raise Lenora to be loud. She did not raise her to be aggressive or combative or hard. She raised her to be grounded, rooted, unshakable in the quiet way that trees are unshakable. Before Nana B passed when Lenora was 19 and in her first year of college, her grandmother pressed something small and cold into her palm. It was a pendant on a thin chain. Brass shaped like an old skeleton key, worn smooth from years of being handled. It had belonged to Nana B's mother before her, and to her mother before that. Nana Bia held Lenora's hand closed around it and looked at her the way she always did, like she was reading something inside her that the rest of the world could not see. She said, "This is not just jewelry, baby. It is a reminder. Everything locked will open when the time is right." Lenora had worn that key pendant every single day since that afternoon, through college, through graduate school, through the early years of building what would become the most quietly powerful private holding company in the region, through her marriage to Kofi, through the births of her daughters, through the humiliations. She was wearing it the evening Claudette walked a sealed envelope across the birthday garden. The brass key was right there at the hollow of her throat, same as always. She had met Kofi when they were both in their 20s. He was charming then, not deep but warm, the kind of man who made rooms feel lighter when he walked in. She had loved him in the way young people love, fully, without asking enough questions. She cooked for him in those early years with real joy. She read their daughters' bedtime stories in 3 voices, one for each girl. She called her attorney Mr. Ellington once a month, quietly, to review the holdings, to restructure what needed restructuring, to make sure everything was airtight. She did all of it without drama, without announcement. She had never told Kofi the full truth about what she had built, because she needed to see who he was first. She needed time to watch him, not because she was suspicious in the beginning, because Nana Bea had taught her that a woman who knows what she owns never has to raise her voice, and a woman who knows who someone is never has to be surprised by them. She had watched Kofi long enough now. She knew exactly who he was. She had known for a while. The woman they humiliated in that garden was never the woman they thought she was. They looked at her silence and saw emptiness. They looked at her calm and saw someone who had no options. But silence was never emptiness for Lenora. It was the only language powerful enough to hold everything she carried. After the birthday party, things moved fast in that quiet, suffocating way that betrayal always moves. Not in explosions, but in slow leaks. Kofi stopped coming home at a normal hour. When he was home, he was somewhere else, sitting at the dinner table with his phone face down and his mind somewhere far from that kitchen, far from those daughters, far from Lenora. He stopped asking her questions, stopped answering hers. The space between them, which had been growing for 2 years, became a wall he seemed comfortable standing behind. His mother worked quickly. Claudette had never trusted Lenora, not from the very first time Kofi brought her home, not from the wedding day, not through the pregnancies or the years of building a home together. She had been waiting for a moment like this. Now she had it. She began filling Kofi's ears with a story she had assembled piece by piece over years, that Lenora came from poverty and had married Kofi for the stability his family name represented, that her background was something she had hidden on purpose, that she had never truly loved him, only needed him, that a man like Kofi deserved someone who matched him, someone with standing, someone established, someone like Renee. Claudette met privately with a family attorney. She did not tell Kofi every detail of those meetings. She told him enough that they were protecting him, that they were making sure the divorce would go smoothly and fairly, that Lenora would be provided for reasonably but would not walk away with anything that belonged to the family. Kofi signed documents his mother slid across a table to him. He did not read them carefully. He trusted her. He had always trusted her more than he had trusted his own eyes. Renee was not just opportunistic. She was methodical. She had inserted herself into the fabric of Kofi's daily life over the previous 14 months, with the patience and precision of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. She had started appearing at professional events he attended, then at dinner with mutual friends, then at the house for a family cookout that somehow she had been invited to without Lenora knowing. She spoke to the daughters in the careful, practiced way of a woman auditioning for a role. She brought Nia a book about science. She complimented Celine's drawings. She called Dara by the nickname only her sisters used, which Lenora noticed immediately and said nothing about. Renee fed Claudette information about Kofi's moods, his finances at work, his doubts. She made herself indispensable to everyone except the woman who actually lived in that house. The weeks after the birthday party were the hardest of Lenora's life, not because she was broken, but because she had to hold herself together while watching everything she had built with a man get dismantled by his own choices, and while keeping her daughters from feeling the full weight of it. Nia had stopped eating much at dinner. Celine had started sleeping with the light on. Dara asked Lenora one night, while Lenora was braiding her hair, if Daddy was going to leave. Lenora did not lie to her daughter. She did not give her false comfort either. She held the braid in her hands and said, "Whatever happens, you and your sisters will always have me. Fully. All of me. That is never going to change." Dara looked at her mother's reflection in the mirror. She nodded slowly, the same nod Lenora had given Claudette in the garden. One night, after the girls were asleep, Lenora walked out to the garden alone. She sat at the same table where the birthday cake had sat. The string lights were down. The banner was gone. It was just the garden now, quiet and dark and still. She sat there for a long time without moving. She thought about her grandmother. She thought about the clay roads and the cedar smell and the brass key pendant that was resting against her chest right now. She let herself feel everything she had been holding, the grief of a marriage that had hollowed out, the rage she refused to perform, the love for her daughters that never wavered, not even at the bottom of the darkest moment. She let the tears come. They came quietly, the way hers always did. Then she wiped her face. She straightened her back. She looked at the night sky for a moment, and she took out her phone and called one number. Mr. Ellington answered on the second ring. He always answered on the second ring. She heard his warm, steady voice, and something in her chest settled. She said, "It is time, Ellington." He did not ask her if she was sure. He did not give her a speech. He had been her attorney and her most trusted advisor for 18 years. He knew what those 3 words meant. He said, "Everything is ready, Lenora. Everything has been ready." She thanked him, ended the call, and sat alone in the garden for a little while longer, not in grief, not in defeat. She sat the way a woman sits when she is about to open a door that has been closed for a very long time. The gala was the social event of the season. It was held outdoors in the courtyard of a newly renovated community arts center in the heart of the city. White tents stretched out across the grounds, anchored by poles wrapped in ivy and soft lights. Round tables held candle centerpieces that flickered in the evening air. A live quartet played near the garden entrance. Women came in evening gowns. Men came in tailored suits. This was the gathering where the city's most prominent black families came to be seen, to give, to belong to something larger than themselves. Everyone who mattered was there. Kofi was there. Claudette was on his left. Renee was on his arm. They moved through the space together like a unit, greeting people, accepting compliments on how well Kofi looked. Claudette had worn something red. She was in her element, surrounded by community, receiving the kind of social warmth she had always fed on. She had spent the last several weeks performing the narrative of a mother who had rescued her son. People believed what they were shown. Lenora arrived late. She came in through the main entrance alone, in a deep burgundy gown that did not announce itself but commanded every room it entered. The brass key pendant was at her throat, same as always. She walked slowly, not because she was nervous, but because she had never been in a hurry to get to a thing she was already certain of. Guests near the entrance turned to look. Someone at a nearby table lowered their glass. The quiet that followed her was not the silence of discomfort. It was the silence of recognition, the sense that something important had just entered the space. She greeted a few people warmly. She accepted a glass of water from a server. She found a seat at a table near the center of the tent and sat down with the easy composure of a woman who owned the floor beneath her chair, which, as it happened, she did. Kofi saw her from across the tent. His expression shifted. Something moved across his face. Not guilt exactly. Something more complicated than guilt. Something that looked like a man starting to sense that he had miscalculated badly, but not yet knowing how badly. The evening's host was Dr. Okafor, a respected woman in the community, a physician and philanthropist who had spent 30 years building institutions in the city. She was dignified, precise, and she did not waste words. She approached the microphone near the front of the tent, and the quartet played itself quiet. The crowd settled. Dr. Okafor thanked the guests for coming, spoke briefly about the work the Arts Center represented, and then said there was one announcement she had been looking forward to all evening. She said that the gala, the renovation of the community space behind them, and the scholarship fund being launched tonight had all been made possible by a single private philanthropic contribution. She said the holding company responsible had been operating quietly in the community for nearly 2 decades, building, investing, waiting to give back at the right scale. She paused, and then she said the name, Nana Bia Holdings, LLC. The tent went quiet in the way that only happens when a name lands and people feel it before they fully understand it. Dr. Okafor said she would like to invite the founder of Nana Bia Holdings to come forward. Lenora set her water glass down on the table. She stood up. She smoothed the front of her gown, and she walked to the microphone with the same unhurried, grounded pace she had carried her whole life. She did not look at Kofi. She did not look at Claudette. She faced the crowd. She spoke for 4 minutes. That was all it took. She said her grandmother's name and let it sit in the air for a moment. She said that everything she had ever built came from a small woman on a red clay road in Georgia who believed that dignity was not something you performed. It was something you protected. She said that she had spent years building quietly because her grandmother taught her that the loudest thing a woman can do is outlast what tried to break her. She thanked Mr. Ellington, who was seated near the back of the tent with a small, steady smile. She looked toward the table where her daughters were seated, Naya and Celine and Dara, all in deep burgundy to match their mother, watching her with wide, still eyes. She smiled at them. They smiled back. Then she stepped back from the microphone, and the screen behind the tent's center pole lit up. It was a simple presentation, clean, professional. It showed the profile of Nana Bia Holdings, total asset valuation, $17.3 billion, properties across 6 states, mineral rights acquired through a land inheritance, and 2 decades of patient legal strategy, a real estate portfolio, a private equity division, a newly established foundation, and near the bottom of the screen, listed simply among the holdings, a residential property address. The address of the house Kofi and Claudette had assumed would be theirs when the divorce was finalized. The crowd read it. Then they understood it. Kofi's face went completely still, the kind of still that comes when every assumption a person has built their life on suddenly loses its foundation at once. He stood there holding his drink without drinking it, like he had forgotten what it was for. Claudette gripped her clutch with both hands. Her eyes moved from the screen to Lenora and back to the screen. Renee looked between Kofi and Claudette and then at the screen again, and something shifted in her expression, a recalculation happening in real time. The murmuring started low and then rose the way a wave rises. People were leaning toward each other, whispering, piecing it together. The birthday, the envelope. The woman they had watched receive divorce papers in front of her children. The woman who had said nothing that evening and nodded once and held her daughters close. That woman owned all of this. On her way out, Lenora passed the table where Kofi was standing. She did not stop. She did not speak. She did not look at him with anger or with triumph. She simply walked past him with that quiet, measured step of hers. And as she passed, she reached up and touched the brass key pendant at her throat, the way she had every day since she was 19 years old, and she kept walking, Some people thought that touch was for him. It was not for him. It was for Nana Bay. It was always for Nana Bay. The divorce proceeded, but it did not proceed the way Claudette had arranged it. The documents Kofi had signed without reading carefully, the ones his mother slid across the table to him in the weeks after the birthday party, contained clauses his attorneys would later describe as deeply unfavorable. He had unknowingly relinquished several claims and protections that could have worked in his favor. When those attorneys learned the full picture of Lenora's financial position, the posture of aggressive negotiation they had planned quietly dissolved. They began managing expectations instead. The house Kofi assumed he would keep transferred cleanly back into Lenora's trust. His financial position, stripped of assets he had believed were shared, was significantly smaller than he had built in his imagination. He was not destitute, but he was far from where he thought he would land. His professional reputation followed. The story moved through their social circle the way true things always move, not through announcement but through the slow, steady correction of what people thought they knew. The same neighbors who had stood in that birthday garden, the same family friends who had watched Claudette carry an envelope across the lawn, they put it together now. And they moved accordingly. Some people said nothing directly to Kofi. They just stopped calling, stopped inviting, stopped including, which in some ways was its own verdict. Renee was gone within 2 weeks of the gala. She returned his last 3 messages with silence. She was seen at a professional dinner shortly after on the arm of someone else, laughing the way she had laughed that evening at the birthday party, comfortable and unbothered, already composing the next chapter of something that had nothing to do with Kofi anymore. He had believed she cared for him. He had not understood that she had been reading a balance sheet, and the balance sheet had changed. Claudette carried the weight of what she had done in the way that proud people carry consequences, without acknowledging them publicly, but visibly. The community she had performed the birthday humiliation in front of was the same community that had been sitting in that tent when the screen lit up. Church friends, neighbors, people whose respect she had spent decades cultivating. Some of them were kind enough not to say anything to her face. Some were not. She was left with the outcome of all her engineering, her son diminished, her target unbowed, and the audience she had played to now knowing the full story. Nia, Celine, and Dara chose to live with their mother. They chose it without drama, without it being a point of conflict, because Kofi looked at his daughters one evening and understood that he could not fight for a position he had forfeited. He would see them, he would be their father, but he would do it from a distance he had created himself, and he would have to spend years learning what that cost. There is a specific kind of loss that does not announce itself loudly. It just settles in. It takes up residence. It is the loss of being seen clearly by the people who once looked up to you, and finding in their eyes not hatred, but simply an absence of the illusion they once had of you. That was what Kofi lived with after. That was the real consequence. Not the money, not the house. The being truly seen, finally, after everything. The garden was quiet at 6 in the morning. Dew sat on the grass in the early light. The string lights were long gone, packed away after the birthday party that had ended the way it did. There was nothing decorative left in the space, just the garden itself. The old oak near the fence. The flower beds Lenora had planted in the second year of living in that house. The stone path that curved from the back door to the table at the center. Everything was still. Lenora sat at that table with a cup of tea, both hands wrapped around the mug. She was not thinking about anything specific. She was doing something rarer and harder than thinking. She was resting. Actually resting the way a person rests, when the thing they were braced for has finally passed and the body starts to let go of the holding. She reached up and touched the pendant at her throat. the brass key smooth and warm from her skin. She closed her eyes for a moment. She thought about a wooden porch in Georgia. She thought about flower and lavender and cedar wood. She thought about a small woman's hands pressing something cold into her palm and a voice telling her that everything locked will open when the time is right. She opened her eyes. She looked at the oak tree near the fence. Then she heard the back door open. All three of them came out at once, still in pajamas. Nia first with her hair wild from sleep, then Celine with one sock on and one in her hand, then Dara running on the stone path in bare feet, calling Mama before she even reached the table. Lenora turned in her chair and opened her arms. They piled into her, all three of them, Nia on the right, Dara in the middle, Celine folded in from the left. The tea nearly spilled. Nobody cared. Lenora pulled them in and held them there, her arms around all three daughters at once, her face pressed into the top of Dara's head. She breathed in. The early morning light came through the oak trees in long, slanted lines. It fell across the table, across the girls in their pajamas, across Lenora's hands on their backs. It was golden and quiet and full of the specific peace that only comes after something hard has finally ended. Nia looked up at her mother after a moment. She asked if everything was going to be okay now. Not in the anxious way she had been asking for months. In the real way, the way a child asks when they are beginning to believe the answer. Lenora looked at her oldest daughter. She touched her face with one hand. She said yes. She said it simply and directly and without any hesitation, the way Nana B used to answer questions that mattered. Yes, everything is going to be okay. They thought her silence was emptiness. They mistook her patience for weakness, but a woman who builds in secret, who carries her power quietly, who waits for the right moment. She does not need to announce herself. The ground itself speaks for her, and sometimes, when the time is finally right, everything locked opens, all at once, right on time. If you saw yourself in Lenora or someone you love, drop a comment below and tell us what part hit you the hardest. Do not forget to like this video because it helps more people find stories like this one. Subscribe if you have not yet. We put our whole heart into every story on this channel, and share this one. Someone out there needs to hear it today. We will see you in the next story.